A 7-year-old girl stood up in court and said, "I am my mother's lawyer." The judge thought it was a joke until he found out she knew more about law than many trained lawyers. "I am my mother's lawyer," said Cecilia, a 7-year-old girl standing before the judge with a folder of papers in her small hands and her chin raised as if she were a professional with decades of experience. The third family court fell into absolute silence. It was as if someone had paused the world for a few seconds. Judge Roberto Mendez, a 58-year-old man with 3 decades of career experience, slowly took off his glasses and carefully cleaned them as if he couldn't see properly. Never in all his experience had he witnessed anything like it, a child presenting herself as a lawyer in his courtroom. "Excuse me, young lady, but I think you're confused. This is a courtroom, not a place for games," he said gently, thinking the girl had gotten lost from her parents. "I'm not joking." "Your Honor," Cecilia replied, her voice firm but her heart pounding. "I'm here to represent my mother, Rosana Silva, in custody case number 00345-Z1224. My father, Ricardo Ferreira, is trying to obtain my custody with ulterior financial motives." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Lawyers stopped checking their phones. Employees dropped their pens. Secretaries turned to get a better look. Even the security guard at the door approached, curious about the unprecedented situation. On the right side of the room, Ricardo Ferreira, 42 years old, dressed in an expensive dark suit, began to laugh loudly. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. The girl is playing school. We can't waste time with childishness." Beside him, Dr. Marcelo Santos, his private lawyer, an elegant 50-year-old man in a $3,000 suit, and with an arrogant demeanor, immediately stood up. "Your Excellency, I earnestly request that the minor be removed from the room. This is disrespectful to the court and to legal procedures." But Cecilia did not move a single millimeter. Her brown eyes shone with a determination that did not match her age. "Your Honor, according to Article 28 of the Child and Adolescent Statute, I have the right to be heard in any judicial proceeding that involves my interests." Silence returned to the courtroom, but now it was different. It was the silence of shock. A 7-year-old girl had just cited a specific law with the precision of an experienced jurist. Dr. Marcelo blinked several times, trying to process what he had heard. "She memorized a few phrases from the internet, Your Honor. Any child can do that nowadays with Google. So may I continue, Doctor?" Cecilia turned to him with a disarming politeness. Article 11634 of the Civil Code states that parental authority includes directing the upbringing and education of children. My father failed in this duty when he abandoned me for 3 consecutive years. The lawyer choked on his own saliva. Ricardo abruptly stopped laughing. Article 1583 of the same code, she continued, determines that custody will be unilateral when one of the parents does not offer adequate conditions for the exercise of parental authority. Article 1586 establishes that this power cannot be exercised against the interest of the minor. The judge leaned forward, completely fascinated. In 30 years of his career, he had never seen an experienced lawyer cite laws with such fluency, much less a child. Furthermore, Cecilia opened her homemade folder, a school folder decorated with unicorn stickers but filled with organized documents. "I have evidence here that proves my father's true intentions." She took an old cell phone from the folder, a simple device that contrasted with the legal sophistication of her words. "I managed to record a conversation where he confesses that he only wants me because of the $2 million inheritance I will receive from my grandfather." The bomb exploded in the courtroom. Ricardo turned white as a sheet. Dr. Marcelo stood up so quickly that he knocked over his chair. From the back of the room, where she was sitting in the last row, Rosana Silva, a 32-year-old woman, thin, wearing a simple and clean blouse, covered her face with her hands and began to cry. "This is inadmissible," Dr. Marcelo shouted, completely losing his composure. "Clandestine recording illegal evidence. I ask that it be rejected." Cecilia looked at him with impressive calm. "Doctor, a recording is not clandestine when it's made by me to protect my own rights. Law 13441 of 2017, Article 4, Section 2, guarantees a child the right to seek protection. The lawyer was speechless. A 7-year-old girl had just given him a law lesson. Your Honor, Cecilia continued, may I play the recording for everyone to hear? The judge nodded, still trying to process the surreal situation. Yes, you may. Cecilia manipulated the phone with small but steady fingers. Ricardo's voice echoed through the courtroom, clear and incriminating. Listen carefully, lawyer. I want the girl's custody, and I want it fast. I don't care what you have to invent. The courtroom fell into a deathly silence. Every word of the recording sounded like hammer blows. The girl will inherit a good sum from her grandfather when she turns 18. I'm talking about almost 2 million Reyes. If I have custody, I'm the one who manages that money. People in the audience began to shake their heads in indignation. It was impossible to hear that and not feel revolt. The girl's mother knows nothing about the inheritance. That woman can't even read properly. Imagine understanding inheritance. By the time she finds out anything, I'll have already settled everything. His cruel laughter on the recording made several people quietly curse under their breath. Rosanna cried even louder, emotional and humiliated at the same time. So it's settled. File for custody tomorrow. Allege that the mother is unfit. Invent that she leaves the child alone, that she has no proper structure, all those things you lawyers know how to do. Cecilia paused the recording and silence once again dominated the room. She looked directly at the judge. Your Honor, this conversation was recorded on March 15th at 2:30 in the afternoon. 3 days later, on the 18th, my father filed for custody alleging exactly those lies. She took more papers from her folder. Here is a copy of the lawsuit. He claims my mother leaves me alone for hours, that our house lacks adequate structure, and that I don't have appropriate school supervision. The judge took the documents, checking each line. Are these allegations true? They are all false, Your Honor. Cecilia organized other papers in front of her. I brought proof that disproves this. First, my school report card from the last 2 years. She handed the sheets to the judge. As you can see, I am the best student in my class in all subjects: Portuguese, math, science, history. My general average is 9.8. The judge examined the documents, impressed not only by the grades, but also by the girl's impeccable organization. Second, Cecilia continued, a statement from my school confirming that I am never late, am always well cared for, well fed, and that my mother actively participates in all school meetings. Dr. Marcello tried to compose himself. Your Honor, school documents can be easily manipulated by interested parties. Are you accusing my school of falsifying documents? Cecilia asked, turning to him with a serious expression that made the man swallow hard. I didn't say that exactly, because if you are, I can call my teacher Helena here right now to testify. She's waiting in the courtroom corridor. The judge smiled for the first time in the hearing. Call your teacher, Cecilia. The courtroom door opened and Helena Santos entered. She was a 40-year-old woman with black hair tied in a bun, wearing a blue blouse and a black skirt that made her look more like a lawyer than a teacher. When she saw Cecilia commanding the hearing with such competence, her eyes filled with tears of pride. Ms. Helena? The judge addressed her. Can you tell us about Cecilia's family situation? Yes, Your Honor. Helena positioned herself beside Cecilia, placing her hand on the girl's shoulder as a sign of support. I've known Cecilia and her family for 2 years. Rosanna is an exemplary mother. She works very hard but has never neglected her daughter's care. Does the child ever stay alone? Never, Your Honor. Cecilia stays at school full-time. When classes end, she stays with me in the teacher's lounge doing homework until her mother comes to pick her up. She's always well-fed with a clean uniform and complete school supplies. And as for the father, does he participate in her school life? Helena looked directly at Ricardo, who was trying to hide in his chair. In 2 years, Your Honor, he appeared at school exactly 0 times. He never asked about grades, behavior, or his daughter's special needs. For all practical purposes, he simply doesn't exist in Cecilia's school life. "That's not true," Ricardo exploded, standing up from his chair. "I've always cared about my daughter." Cecilia turned to him with her arms crossed, adopting a posture that impressed everyone present with its maturity. "Then tell me, Dad, what is my teacher's full name? What grade am I in exactly? What is my favorite subject? What is my best friend's name? When is my birthday?" Ricardo was completely silent. He couldn't answer a single basic question about his own daughter. "I'll help you," Cecilia said with a coldness that pierced the hearts of everyone present. "My teacher's name is Helena Santos. I am in the second year of elementary school. My favorite subject is Portuguese. My best friend's name is Julia. My birthday is September 12th. Ricardo's embarrassment was visible to everyone. I don't need to memorize those things." "You don't need to memorize, Dad. You need to live. You need to be present. You need to love truly, not pretend to love for money." The courtroom fell into complete silence. That simple sentence from a 7-year-old child summarized the entire tragedy of the case. "Your Honor," Cecilia continued, "I have one more important piece of evidence." She took another document from the folder. "Proof that my father has not paid child support for exactly 3 years and 2 months, $. "How do you survive?" the judge asked, genuinely curious about their situation. "My mother works as a cleaning assistant at the company Limpeza Total. She leaves home at 5 a.m. and returns at 8 p.m. She earns 1.5 minimum wages. It's not a lot of money, but she manages to give me everything a child needs: food on the table, clean clothes, school supplies, medical care when necessary." Cecilia paused, looking at Rosanna at the back of the room. "And most importantly, Your Honor, she gives me true love every day." Rosanna wept copiously, moved to hear her daughter defend her with such wisdom and maturity. Because of this, Cecilia turned her attention back to the judge. According to Article 1566 of the Civil Code, which establishes the duties of spouses and by extension of parents to support, raise, and educate their children, my father failed in all aspects. Dr. Marcello was officially out of arguments. A 7-year-old girl was giving a law lesson that he could never refute. According to Article 1637 of the same code, Cecilia continued, relentlessly, parental authority is extinguished by the practice of acts contrary to good morals. Abandoning a daughter for 3 years, only to later try and use her as a source of income, perfectly fits this definition. The judge made some notes, clearly impressed with the girl's legal knowledge. "Cecilia, do you have anything else to present?" "Yes, Your Honor, but first I would like to exercise a right guaranteed by law 13431 of 2017. "What right?" "The right of a child to be heard in judicial proceedings that concern them. I want to speak directly with you about what I feel and what I want." The judge solemnly nodded. "You may speak, Cecilia." The girl took a deep breath, organized her thoughts, and began to speak with a maturity that moved everyone present. "Your Honor, for 7 years of my life, I wondered why my father didn't live with us. Why he only appeared occasionally, why he never played with me like my friends' fathers." Her voice began to tremble slightly, but she continued firm. "I thought maybe it was my fault that I wasn't a good enough daughter, that if I got better grades, if I behaved better, maybe he would come home." Several people in this courtroom discreetly wiped their eyes. "But 3 weeks ago I discovered the truth. My father didn't abandon me because I wasn't good enough. He abandoned me because I'm just a child to him, not a daughter, and now he wants to use me as a tool to get rich." Cecilia turned to Ricardo, who couldn't look her in the eyes. "Dad, I don't hate you, but I also don't want to be your object of profit. I want to be loved for who I am, not for the money I can bring in." The courtroom was in absolute silence. Even the most experienced officials were visibly moved. "Therefore, Your Honor, I use this moment to make 2 official requests." "What requests?" "First, that my custody remain with my mother, who truly loves me and raised me with dignity, even without much money. And the second." Cecilia took a deep breath before dropping the bombshell that would leave everyone speechless. "Second, I formally renounce my grandfather's inheritance. I do not want the 2 million Reyes." The courtroom erupted in exclamations of surprise. Even the judge's eyes widened. "Cecilia, are you sure about what you're saying?" I am absolutely sure, Your Honor. I prefer to live with love and dignity beside my mother than to be rich with a father who doesn't truly love me. Ricardo stood up desperately. She can't do that. She's a minor. She doesn't have the capacity to renounce. You're mistaken, Dad, Cecilia calmly replied. Article 1804 of the Civil Code allows for renunciation of inheritance through a legal representative. My mother is my legal representative and will sign the renunciation on my behalf. Dr. Marcello made one last desperate attempt. Your Honor, this is absurd. The minor is clearly being manipulated. Manipulated by whom, Doctor? The judge asked with irony. By the mother who works 12 hours a day to support her, by the teacher who taught her to defend herself, or by the father who wants to use her to get rich. Cecilia approached the judge's bench. Your Honor, may I ask a personal question? You may. Do you have children? I have 2 children. And do they know that you love them? Of course they do. I envy them, Cecilia said with devastating simplicity, because until today I never knew if my father truly loved me. Now I know he doesn't. How do you know? Because someone who truly loves cannot hurt the beloved person. My father is willing to take me away from my mother, who is my whole life, just to get access to my money. That's not love, Your Honor. That's pure greed. The judge remained silent for long seconds, visibly touched by the maturity of that extraordinary child. Cecilia, he finally said, you are a very special girl. I have never seen anything like it in all my years in my career. Thank you, Your Honor, but may I continue presenting the other evidence? Yes, you may, Dr. Cecilia. The affectionate nickname echoed through the courtroom as official recognition. That girl had won not only the judge's respect, but also that of everyone present. And she wasn't finished yet. She had more ammunition in her unicorn folder, more devastating evidence, more arguments that would make Ricardo forever regret underestimating his daughter. The first round was over, and Cecilia had won by technical knockout, but the fight wasn't finished yet. You may continue, Dr. Cecilia, the judge had said, and that affectionate nickname echoed through the courtroom as official recognition. Cecilia organized her papers with the precision of an experienced lawyer, while Dr. Marcello broke into a cold sweat, and Ricardo buried his face in his hands knowing he was lost. Thank you, Your Honor, Cecilia said, pulling more documents from her unicorn folder. Now I will prove that all my father's allegations are fabricated lies. She carefully opened a laminated sheet. Here is the floor plan of our apartment drawn by the building's administration itself. It has 2 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, bathroom, and service area totaling 45 meters. The judge examined the document. And what problem does your father allege about the housing? He stated in the petition that we live in an unhealthy room without minimum habitability conditions. Cecilia read from the process. But as you can see, we have adequate space for 2 people. Dr. Marcello tried to defend himself. Your Honor, physical space does not mean adequate conditions. You're right, Doctor, Cecilia interrupted him politely. That's why I brought this. She took out a transparent folder full of photos. Photographs of our home taken last week. As you can see, we have adequate furniture, a working refrigerator, a stove in perfect condition, a television, and a study desk where I do my homework every day. The photos passed through the judge's hands. They showed a small apartment, but extremely clean and organized, with everything lovingly arranged. Here is my bedroom, which I share with my mother. Cecilia continued, pointing to a photo. We have 2 beds, a wardrobe, and a shelf with my school books. There is my study desk where I learned all the laws I am citing today. Ricardo could no longer look at his daughter. He knew that every word she spoke was true, and every lie he had invented was being publicly unmasked. My father also alleged that I stay home alone while my mother works. Cecilia continued, consulting the process. That is false. May I prove it? She took a letterhead paper from the folder. Here is a statement from Professor João Silva Municipal School, where I study. It confirms that I am at school full-time from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. And after 6, the judge asked. After 6, my mother picks me up and we go home together. We have dinner, she helps me with my homework, we watch television, and we go to sleep. I am never alone, Your Honor. Your Helena, who was beside Cecilia, confirmed with a nod of her head. It's true, Your Honor. Rosanna is punctual every day to pick up Cecilia. Dr. Marcello made another desperate attempt. But what about on weekends and during school holidays? Cecilia smiled for the first time in the hearing. Excellent question, Doctor. On weekends, my mother doesn't work. We stay together all the time. We go to the park, to the supermarket. She teaches me how to cook. And during the holidays, I stay at Donna Carmen's house, our neighbor who takes care of me while my mother works. And who is this Donna Carmen? The judge asked. Carmen Rodriguez, a 68-year-old retiree. She has lived in apartment 302 of our building for 15 years. She is also here today to testify if necessary. The judge looked at the audience, and a friendly elderly lady waved from the third row. Madam, can you approach? Donna Carmen stood up with difficulty, leaning on a cane but with a proud smile on her face. She was a tiny woman with white hair, wearing a simple but immaculate floral dress. Donna Carmen, the judge addressed her gently. Do you know Cecilia's family? I've known them for 2 years, Doctor, she replied with a clear voice. Rosanna is a hard-working, honest girl, and Cecilia is an angel. During the holidays, she stays with me. We bake cookies, watch soap operas. She teaches me things from school. Does the child give you trouble? Donna Carmen laughed. Trouble. For goodness sake, she helps me with everything. She washes the dishes, organizes my medications, reads the newspaper to me because my eyesight is weak. She's the granddaughter I never had. And the father, does Mr. Ricardo ever appear there? Donna Carmen's face became serious. In 2 years, Doctor, I saw him 3 times. 3 times, and 2 out of those 3 were just to argue with Rosanna about money. What kind of arguments? He would show up wanting her to lend him money or asking to take the girl on weekends to impress his new girlfriend. But when Cecilia was sick or needed something, he would disappear. Ricardo tried to defend himself. That's not true. I've always been concerned about my daughter. Donna Carmen turned to him with a raised finger. Concerned about nothing, young man. When the girl had pneumonia last year, it was her mother who rushed her to the hospital. You didn't even know she was sick. I didn't know. Okay, Ricardo stammered. You didn't know because you didn't want to know, Donna Carmen firmly retorted. Rosanna called you 5 times. 5, you didn't answer any of them. Cecilia seized the moment. Your Honor, my father also alleged that I do not receive adequate medical care. I can prove that this is a lie. She took out a folder full of medical papers. Here are all my medical exams from the last 2 years, pediatrician appointments every 6 months, dentist every 4 months, all vaccinations up to date. The judge leafed through the documents, impressed with the organization. And who pays for these appointments? My mother, Your Honor. She has health insurance from the company where she works. And when I need more expensive medicine, she works extra on weekends to get the money. What kind of extra work? She cleans private homes on Saturdays and Sundays, earning $50 per house. I've seen her clean 4 houses on a Saturday to buy my flu medicine. Rosanna wept copiously at the back of the room, moved to hear her daughter talk about her sacrifices. Meanwhile, Cecilia continued, looking directly at Ricardo. My father never paid a single real for my medical expenses, not even when I was hospitalized with pneumonia. I didn't know you were hospitalized, Ricardo protested. You didn't know because you didn't want to know, Cecilia retorted coldly. My mother called you 7 times that day. You hung up on her. Dr. Marcello tried to change strategy. Your Honor, financial matters are important, but they are not everything. What matters is the emotional bond. Emotional bond, Cecilia interrupted him. Do you want to talk about emotional bond, Doctor? She took more photos from the folder. These are photos from my last birthday parties, 6 years old, 7 years old. As you can see, present are my mother, Donna Carmen, my teacher Helena, and some school friends. The judge examined the photos. They were simple parties, but full of affection. Cecilia was blowing out candles on a homemade cake, embraced by her mother. And where is your father in these photos? He's not in any of them, Your Honor, because he never came to my birthday parties. Ricardo turned red. I was working on my 6th birthday. You were at a steakhouse with your girlfriend, Cecilia said without emotion. I saw the photos on her Facebook. On my 7th birthday, you were at a beach in Guarujá. I saw those photos too. Ricardo's embarrassment was visible to everyone in the courtroom. He couldn't refute any of his daughter's accusations because all of them were true. Your Honor, Cecilia continued relentlessly, my father talks about an emotional bond, but I can prove that this bond never existed on his part. She took a small notebook from the folder. This is my diary. I've been writing in it for 2 years. May I read some excerpts? You may. Cecilia opened the notebook to a marked page. September 15th last year, 3 days after my birthday. Today it's been 3 days since I turned 7. Daddy didn't come to my party. Mommy said he was busy, but I saw her cry in the bathroom. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. The innocence of those words was heartbreaking. October 23rd, she continued reading. Daddy came home today, stayed for half an hour. He brought a present that still had the store tag on it. I think he bought it in a hurry. He didn't remember what my favorite doll was. Several people in the audience discreetly wiped their eyes. December 12th. Daddy called today, said he would pick me up for a walk on Sunday. I waited for him from 2 to 6 in the afternoon. He didn't come. Mommy made up an excuse, but I know he forgot. Ricardo could no longer look at his daughter. Every word from the diary was like a stab to his conscience. Do you want me to continue, Your Honor? Cecilia asked. I have notes here of 15 promises my father made and didn't keep. 15. You don't need to continue, the judge said gently. I understand, Doctor. Marcelo made one last attempt. Your Honor, children can exaggerate situations. Exaggerate! Cecilia turned to him with indignation. Doctor, do you have children? I do. Have you ever forgotten their birthday? Never. Have you ever promised an outing and not kept it? No. Have you gone months without seeing them? Never. Then don't say I'm exaggerating. You wouldn't let your children go through this, but you think it's normal for me to... The lawyer was left without a response. A 7-year-old girl had just given him a lesson in fatherhood. Your Honor, Cecilia continued, turning her attention back to the judge. I want to present one more important piece of evidence. She took a sealed envelope from the folder. Here are all the messages my mother sent to my father over the past 2 years. WhatsApp, SMS, all printed and authenticated. The judge received the envelope. What kind of messages? Messages about me, informing him about medical appointments, school grades, school presentations, health problems. My mother always tried to keep my father informed about my life, and he responded rarely, and when he did, it was always with just one word, okay. Right. Cool. He never asked for details, never truly cared. Cecilia opened the envelope and took out some sheets. May I read some? You may. Message from May 15th. Ricardo, Cecilia had a presentation at school today. She talked about professions and said she wants to be a lawyer to defend people. She looked beautiful. Cecilia paused. His response, okay. Message from July 3rd. Cecilia got a 10 on her Portuguese test. The teacher said she writes better than many older children. I'm very proud. Another pause. His response, cool. Message from August 18th. Ricardo, Cecilia has had a fever for 2 days. I'm taking her to the doctor tomorrow. If you want to come along, the appointment is at 9 a.m. at the health clinic. A longer pause. His response, none. He didn't even reply. The courtroom was in complete silence. It was impossible to listen to that and not be moved. Your Honor, Cecilia said, putting away the messages. Is this an emotional bond? Is this a present father? Is this paternal love? The judge shook his head negatively. No, Cecilia, it definitely is not. Therefore, she continued, when I discovered that my father wants my custody only to manage my inheritance, I was not surprised. I was sad, but not surprised. She turned to Ricardo one last time. Dad, for 7 years I dreamed that one day you would truly love me, that you would want to spend time with me, meet my friends, help me with homework, comfort me when I was sad." Her voice began to tremble, but she continued firm. "Now I understand that this will never happen, because to love a person you first need to see them as a person, not as an object." Ricardo tried to speak. "Cecilia, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." She cut him off. "I understand that to you I am just a means to get rich, and you know what else I accept that, but I will not be an accomplice." She turned to the judge. "Therefore, Your Honor, in addition to renouncing the inheritance, I have one last request." "What is it?" "I want it to be recorded in the minutes that I do not wish for any type of visitation or contact with my father. I do not want to be forced to meet someone who sees me as money, not as a daughter." The final bombshell exploded in the courtroom. Ricardo stood up desperately. "You can't do that. I am your father." "Blood father," Cecilia replied with devastating calm. "A father by heart is the one who raised me, educated me, loved me every day. That was my mother." Dr. Marcello was officially defeated. There was no more legal or emotional argument that could save his client. "Your Honor," Cecilia made her final conclusion. "Based on all the evidence presented, I request that my custody remain exclusively with my mother, Rosana Silva, and that any future request for visitation by the petitioner Ricardo Ferreira be denied." She closed her unicorn folder with the solemnity of an experienced lawyer. "These were the proofs I had to present." The judge remained silent for long seconds, processing everything he had witnessed. Never in 3 decades of his career had he seen anything as impressive as that 7-year-old girl defending her own family with the competence of an experienced jurist. "Cecilia," he finally said, "you are an extraordinary girl. Your arguments are impeccable, your evidence is irrefutable, and your maturity is impressive." "Thank you, Your Honor. But before I give my decision, I need to ask a question. How did you learn all of this? How did a 7-year-old child manage to master family law with such precision?" Cecilia smiled for the second time in the hearing. "That's a long story, Your Honor. It began 3 weeks ago when I discovered the truth about my father." "You may tell it." The entire courtroom leaned forward, curious to know how that extraordinary girl had gotten to that point. "I can," Cecilia said, "but it's a story that will explain not only how I learned law, but also how I discovered that love is worth more than any money in the world." The judge settled back in his chair. "I'm listening, Dr. Cecilia." It was time to tell how it all began, how an ordinary girl had transformed into a little warrior capable of confronting her own father in court, and how she had discovered that sometimes children need to teach adults what truly matters in life. The story was only halfway through, and the best was yet to come. "It all started 3 weeks ago," Cecilia said, looking at the judge with the same seriousness she had maintained throughout the hearing. "It was a rainy Thursday, March 15th at 2 p.m. I was in my room playing school with my dolls when I heard my father talking on the phone." The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Everyone wanted to understand how that extraordinary girl had gotten to that point. "It wasn't normal for him to call our house," she continued. "It had been almost 6 months since he'd given any news. My mother was at work, so I was alone with my dolls, pretending to be their teacher." She paused as if reliving that moment. "I heard his voice coming from the living room and thought, how strange for Dad to be here, because normally he didn't even come inside the house. When he came to pick me up for an outing, he would wait at the building's front desk." The judge leaned forward, completely absorbed by the narrative. "Then I realized he was talking on the phone. He wasn't actually in the living room, but his voice was very loud. So I left my dolls and went to the bedroom door to listen better." Cecilia took a deep breath as if preparing to relive the most painful moment of her life. "The first thing I heard was, 'Listen carefully, lawyer. I want the girl's custody, and I want it fast. I don't care what you have to invent.' And I thought, girl, which girl is he talking about, me?" The courtroom remained in a deathly silence. Even the clerks had stopped typing to listen. Then he continued, "The girl will inherit a good sum from her grandfather when she turns 18. I'm talking about almost 2 million Reyes. And it was at that moment, Your Honor, that my world fell apart." Cecilia's voice trembled slightly. but she continued firm. 2 million Reyes. I didn't even know I had a rich grandfather, much less that I was going to inherit anything. But what hurt me the most wasn't discovering about the money, it was realizing that my father was talking about me as if I were an object, not a person. Rosanna cried softly at the back of the room, reliving the pain her daughter had felt that day. Then he said, "If I have custody, I'm the one who manages that money. And I understood everything, Your Honor. My father didn't want me back because he missed me, because he loved me, because he wanted to be my real father. He wanted me as a bank account." Cecilia paused to control her emotion, but the part that hurt the most came next. He said, "The girl's mother knows nothing about the inheritance. That woman can't even read properly. Imagine understanding inheritance." The contempt in her voice as she repeated her father's words made several people in the courtroom shake their heads in indignation. At that moment, Your Honor, I felt a rage I had never felt in my life, not for myself, but for my mother. How dare he speak like that about the woman who raised me alone, the woman who works 12 hours a day to give me everything I need? Cecilia turned to look at Rosanna at the back of the room. My mother may not have studied much, but she is the smartest person I know. She can do mental math better than any calculator. She knows when I'm sad just by looking at my face. She knows how to make the best chocolate cake in the world with simple ingredients. Some people in the audience smiled through their tears. After that, he said, "By the time she finds out anything, I'll have already settled everything." And he laughed. He laughed at my mother. He laughed at me. He laughed at the whole situation as if it were a big joke. Cecilia's indignation was palpable. That's when I understood I needed to do something. I couldn't let him use our ignorance about the inheritance to separate us. So I did something I learned from watching detective movies on television. "What did you do?" the judge asked, curious. I ran to the bedroom, grabbed my mother's cell phone, and went back near the door. I put the phone on record mode and captured the rest of the conversation. Dr. Marcello attempted an objection. "Your Honor, clandestine recording." "Doctor." Cecilia interrupted him politely. "I was 7 years old and trying to protect my family. I didn't know I was making a clandestine recording. I just knew I needed proof of what my father was planning." The judge nodded in agreement. "Continue, Cecilia." "I managed to record him when he said, 'File for custody tomorrow, allege that the mother is unfit, invent that she leaves the child alone, that she has no proper structure, all those things you lawyers know how to do.'" The courtroom grew tense. Everyone was hearing how that judicial farce had been planned. And the final part, "That woman can't even read properly. By the time she finds out anything, I'll have already settled everything," followed by that cruel laugh that made me want to vomit. Cecilia stopped for a few seconds, as if reliving the nausea of that moment. When he hung up, I ran to the bathroom and vomited, not because I was sick, but because I had discovered that my own father was capable of lying in court to use me as a tool for enrichment. The silence in the courtroom was awkward. Afterward, I sat on the bathroom floor crying for almost an hour. I didn't know what to do with that information. How could I tell my mother that her ex-husband was planning a judicial trap? Helena, who was beside Cecilia, squeezed the girl's shoulder in silent support. When my mother arrived home from work that night, I watched her taking off her aching shoes, complaining of back pain, but always with a smile for me, and I thought, how am I going to destroy her peace by telling her this? "And what did you decide to do?" the judge asked. First, I tried to act as if nothing had happened. We had dinner together. She helped me with my homework. We watched a cartoon on television, but when we went to sleep, I couldn't stop thinking. Cecilia looked at this courtroom ceiling as if she were seeing the scene again. I stayed awake all night watching my mother sleep. She slept beside me in our small room after a whole day of hard work. And I thought, she doesn't deserve to go through this. She doesn't deserve to be deceived again. "Again?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor. My father had deceived my mother before. When he left home, he said he was going to take some time to think about life. She waited for him to come back for almost a year. Then she found out he was living with another woman." Ricardo sank even further into his chair, being publicly exposed for all his lies and betrayals. The next day, Friday, I went to school with an idea in my head to tell everything to my teacher, Helena. She had always been like a second mother to me. Helena smiled through her tears, proud of the trust Cecilia had placed in her. During recess, instead of playing with my classmates, I went to the classroom where Aunt Helena was grading papers. I knocked on the door and asked if I could talk to her about something very serious. "And how did she react?" the judge asked. "She saw that I was different. Normally I'm a cheerful, playful child, but that day I was serious, worried. She immediately put down her papers and gave me her full attention." Cecilia turned to Helena with gratitude. I told her everything, the call, the inheritance, my father's plan, the recording I had made. She listened to me in absolute silence, and when I finished, I saw tears in her eyes. What did she say? The first thing she said was, "Cecilia, you are a very brave girl." Then she asked if I was sure about everything I had heard. I asked her to listen to the recording. Helena confirmed with a nod. It was one of the most shocking moments of my career as a teacher. When she heard the recording, Cecilia continued, Aunt Helena was indignant. She said it was inadmissible that my father had no right to toy with our family that way. And what was her advice? She said that I needed to tell my mother everything immediately, that my mother had a right to know what was happening, even if it was painful. Cecilia looked at Rosanna at the back of the room. "But I was afraid, Your Honor. Afraid that my mother wouldn't know how to defend herself. She had always been very simple, very trusting of people. I knew she would be lost in a courtroom facing expensive lawyers and serious judges. That's when Aunt Helena told me something that changed everything." "What did she tell you?" "That before becoming a teacher, she had studied law for 2 years in college. She didn't graduate because she needed to work to support her family, but she knew the basic laws about family and children." The courtroom paid close attention. It was the crucial moment of the story. She explained to me that there was a legal possibility for me to represent my family in court, not as an official lawyer, of course, but as a family assistant. She said it was rare, but that the law allowed it. "And did you accept this possibility?" "At first I thought it was crazy. How could a 7-year-old girl face trained lawyers in court? But then Aunt Helena asked me a question that changed my perspective." "What question?" She asked Cecilia what is more important, to be afraid or to protect those you love. And at that moment I understood that I had no choice. Either I learned to defend myself or my father would succeed in separating us. Cecilia took a deep breath, reliving that moment of decision. That's when I told Aunt Helena, "Then teach me everything I need to know to defend my mother." And she replied, "Cecilia, it's going to be very difficult. You'll have to study complicated laws, memorize articles, understand things that even adults find difficult." "And you didn't give up?" "On the contrary, Your Honor. The more she said it was difficult, the more certain I was that I would succeed. Because when you truly love someone, nothing is too difficult." The courtroom was completely absorbed by the narrative. That same afternoon, Aunt Helena went to our house to talk with my mother. She told her everything, the call, the inheritance, my father's plan, my idea to defend us in court. "How did your mother react?" "First she cried. She cried a lot. Not from sadness, but from anger. Anger at having been deceived again. Anger at seeing that her ex-husband wanted to use her daughter as an object." Rosanna confirmed with a nod, remembering that painful day. "Then she became desperate. 'How am I going to defend myself?' she asked. 'I don't understand anything about law. I don't have money for a lawyer. I'm going to lose my daughter to that terrible man.' Is that when you stepped in?" "Yes. I approached my mother, held her hands and said, 'Mom, you're not going to lose me. I'm going to be your lawyer. I'll learn everything necessary to protect our family.'" Cecilia smiled as she remembered that moment. My mother looked at me as if I had gone crazy. "Cecilia, you're 7 years old." But I replied, "So what? I'm 7 years old, but I have enough love for you to face the whole world." Several people in the courtroom discreetly wiped their eyes. Aunt Helena explained to my mother that it was possible that I could represent our family under her supervision, that we would study together, prepare all the evidence, organize all the arguments. And your mother agreed. At first she hesitated. She was afraid that I would be exposed to a situation too heavy for my age, but when I showed her my father's recording, when she heard with her own ears his contempt for our family, she understood that we had no choice. Cecilia looked directly at Ricardo. My mother heard you talking about her as if she were trash, Dad. She heard you planning to deceive us, use us, separate us, and then she understood that she had to fight. That night the three of us sat at the kitchen table and made a pact. We were going to study together, work together, fight together. We weren't going to let anyone destroy our family for money. And how did the studies begin? On Saturday morning, Aunt Helena appeared at our house with a suitcase full of law books, the Civil Code, the Child and Adolescent Statute, the Federal Constitution. It looked like she had brought an entire library. Cecilia laughed, remembering the scene. She spread all the books on our small kitchen table and said, "Cecilia, if you want to be your mother's lawyer, you need to study like one. Let's start with the basics. What is parental authority?" Was it difficult at first? Very difficult, Your Honor. The first words I read seemed to be in another language: parental authority, unilateral custody, the best interest of the minor. I didn't understand anything. How did you overcome this difficulty? Aunt Helena was very patient. She explained each legal term with simple words. For example, when I read parental authority, she explained, "It is the right and duty of parents to care for their children, but this power has limits. It cannot be used against the child's interest." Cecilia looked at Helena with gratitude. She transformed complicated laws into language I could understand. And the most incredible thing, the more I learned, the more interested I became. It was as if I had discovered a secret language that could protect people. How long did you study each day? Every day after school from 6 to 9 p.m., weekends from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. with breaks for lunch and snacks. The judge was impressed. 3 weeks of intensive study. Exactly. And you know what the most interesting part was, Your Honor? What? I discovered that I had a knack for memorizing laws. It was as if my brain was a sponge for legal information. In 1 week I was already memorizing entire articles of the Civil Code. Helena confirmed with pride. Cecilia has an exceptional intelligence for law. In 2 weeks she knew more about custody and parental authority than many lawyers. But the most important part of the studies wasn't memorizing laws, Cecilia continued. It was understanding that the law exists to protect people, especially the weakest. And at that moment, my mother and I were the weakest. How so? My father had money to hire an expensive lawyer. He had knowledge about the inheritance that we didn't. He had experience manipulating situations. We only had one thing in our favor. What? The truth, Cecilia said with devastating simplicity, and I discovered that when you have the truth on your side and know the laws that protect that truth, you can face any adversary. The courtroom was moved by that life lesson coming from a 7-year-old child. That's how Your Honor, an ordinary girl, transformed into her own mother's lawyer, not out of ambition, not out of revenge, but out of pure and simple love. Cecilia looked at everyone in the courtroom. And now you know how I got here through 3 weeks of the most intense studies of my life, driven by the determination not to let anyone destroy my family. The judge remained silent for a few seconds, processing that extraordinary story. Cecilia, he finally said, you are living proof that when a child is moved by true love, they can move mountains. Thank you, Your Honor, but the story isn't over yet. How so? I still need to tell how I transformed all that knowledge into strategy for this court and how I prepared every piece of evidence I presented today. The judge smiled. Then continue, Dr. Cecilia, we are all curious to hear the rest. It was time to tell the second part of that extraordinary journey, how a 7-year-old girl had prepared to face her own father in the most important courtroom of her life. After 2 weeks of studying law, Cecilia continued her narrative to the fascinated courtroom. I already knew all the laws about custody and parental authority, but Aunt Helena taught me that knowing the law is only half the job. The other half is knowing how to use that knowledge in court. The judge settled more comfortably in his chair, completely absorbed by the story. It was on a Monday, April 3rd, that Aunt Helena arrived at our house with news that changed everything. She had received a call from the school informing her that a court official had delivered a judicial summons to my mother. Rosanna confirmed with a sad nod. She remembered that terrible day perfectly. My mother opened the envelope with trembling hands. Cecilia continued, "It was my father's official petition requesting my custody. When she started reading it aloud, I saw that everything was exactly as he had planned in the phone conversation." "What were the allegations?" the judge asked, although he already knew the answer. "Material and emotional abandonment by my mother. Negligence in medical care, inadequate family environment, lack of school supervision. All lies but very well crafted legally." Cecilia paused, remembering her mother's desperate expression. My mother started to cry and said, "Cecilia, how am I going to prove that this is a lie? Who will believe a cleaning lady against a man who has money to hire an expensive lawyer?" And it was at that moment that I understood I needed to be more than a child who knew laws. I needed to be a true strategist. Helena smiled proudly, remembering that turning point. Aunt Helena sat with me at the kitchen table and said, "Cecilia, now we're going to turn you into a real lawyer. It's not enough to know the laws. You need to learn how to build a solid defense, organize evidence, anticipate the opponent's arguments." "How did you do that?" the judge asked, genuinely curious. "First, Aunt Helena taught me to think like a lawyer. She said, 'Imagine you are your father's lawyer. What arguments would you use?' And I started listing them. I would say that my mother works a lot and leaves me alone, that our house is small, that she isn't educated, that she can't give me a better future." Cecilia demonstrated impressive maturity in analyzing the situation. Then she asked, "And how would you refute each of those arguments?" That's when my true legal education began. "Explain better." For every lie my father told, we needed irrefutable proof. He said I stay alone. We would prove I'm at school full-time. He said our house is inadequate. We would photograph every room. He said I don't have medical supervision. We would gather all the exams and consultations. The courtroom followed every word with full attention. But Aunt Helena taught me that it wasn't enough to just have the evidence. I needed to know how to present it convincingly. "Cecilia," she said, "in court, it's not enough to be right. You need to prove you're right." "And how did you organize that evidence?" "We transformed our house into a real law firm. The kitchen table became our workstation. My mother bought several plastic folders and we started organizing everything by categories." Cecilia gestured as she explained, showing the same organization she had demonstrated in court. "Folder number 1, school documents, report cards, declarations, attendance records, recommendation letters from the teacher. Folder number 2, medical documents, exams, prescriptions, appointment receipts, updated vaccination card." "How many folders did you make?" 8 folders, Your Honor. Folder 3, house documents, rental agreement, paid bills, photos of all rooms. Folder 4, financial proofs, my mother's salary slips, bank statements, invoices for everything she bought for me. The judge was impressed with the meticulous organization. Folder 5, evidence of paternal abandonment, all the messages my mother sent to my father without a response, photos of my birthdays where he didn't appear, proof that he never paid child support. Ricardo visibly cringed further in his chair, seeing his negligence systematically documented. Folder 6, testimonies from people who know us, Dona Carmen neighbors, school staff. Folder 7, the recording of my father's conversation and all the legal analyses we made of it. And Folder 8? Folder 8 was special. Cecilia smiled for the first time during the flashback. It was my folder of legal arguments, all the articles of law I had memorized, organized by topic with simple explanations that I wrote myself. Helena leaned forward. "May I add something, Your Honor?" "Of course." Cecilia created her own study system. She would take each article of law, read it several times until she memorized it, then write in her own words what that article meant in practice. For example, Article 11634 of the Civil Code, Cecilia recited from memory. The law says, "It is incumbent upon both parents, whatever their marital status, the full exercise of parental authority." My translation, it doesn't matter if the parents are married or separated, both have responsibility for their children. The judge smiled, very intelligent. "But then comes the practical part," Cecilia continued. "Since my father abandoned this responsibility for 3 years, he lost the right to claim parental authority only when it's financially convenient for him. Did you study every possible defense argument?" "Every single one, Your Honor. Aunt Helena played the role of my father's lawyer, and I had to refute each argument. It was like a game, but a very serious game." "Give me an example." She would say, "Cecilia, your father's lawyer will allege that he has better financial conditions to raise you." And I would respond, "Article 1583 of the Civil Code establishes that custody must consider not only material conditions, but primarily emotional bonds and the ability to provide adequate education and development." The courtroom was impressed with the meticulous preparation. Then I would add, "My mother may not have much money, but she gave me an exemplary education, constant medical care, and most importantly, unconditional love. My father has money, but he has no love, and money without love doesn't raise healthy children." "How did you simulate the hearing?" "Ah, that was the most important part of the preparation." Cecilia brightened up. "Aunt Helena transformed our living room into a mini courtroom. She would sit in a high chair playing the role of the judge. My mother would sit in the audience, and I had to present all the arguments as if it were the real hearing." "And how was it at first?" "Terrible," Cecilia laughed. "I would get nervous, forget the law's stammer, but Aunt Helena was patient. She would say, 'Cecilia, you're not just defending a case, you're defending your family. Remember that when you get nervous,'" Helena confirmed. We repeated the simulation more than 20 times until Cecilia could present all the arguments naturally. "But the most difficult part wasn't memorizing the laws," Cecilia continued. "It was preparing myself emotionally to face my father." The courtroom paid close attention. It was the most delicate moment of the preparation. Aunt Helena explained to me that in court my father and his lawyer would try to disqualify me, humiliate me, make me look like a child playing adult. She said, "Cecilia, they will attack you personally because they cannot attack your arguments." How did you prepare for that? By practicing staying calm in difficult situations. Aunt Helena simulated the attacks I might receive. She would say things like, "You are just a child. You don't understand anything about law." And I had to respond calmly, citing laws and maintaining politeness. Did it work? It took me a while to learn. At first I would get angry and want to shout back, but Aunt Helena taught me that in court, whoever loses their composure loses credibility. Cecilia looked directly at Dr. Marcello, who had tried to disqualify her throughout the hearing. She taught me that when someone attacks you personally, instead of attacking your arguments, it's because they have no arguments to refute. And that's a victory, not a defeat. What an important lesson. The most important lesson came 3 days before the hearing. Cecilia continued, "I was nervous, afraid of failing, afraid of losing my mother. Aunt Helena sat with me and said, 'Cecilia, do you want to know what your greatest power in court is?' What was it? She said, 'Your greatest power is the truth. You won't win because you're intelligent, although you are. You won't win because you know laws, although you do. You'll win because you are defending what is right.'" The courtroom fell silent, absorbing that profound lesson. "Your father is lying," she continued. "His lawyer knows he is lying. The judge will realize they are lying, and when people lie in court to harm a child, they always lose." Did that reassure you? Completely, because I understood that I didn't need to be perfect, I just needed to be honest and well prepared. And how was the final preparation? On the eve of the hearing, we did our last simulation, but this time, instead of training legal arguments, Aunt Helena asked me a different question. "What question, Cecilia?" "If you could say just one thing to the judge, what would it be?" And I answered without hesitation that I don't want to be rich with a father who doesn't love me. I prefer to be happy with a mother who truly loves me. Several people in the courtroom discreetly wiped their eyes. Aunt Helena smiled and said, "There you are prepared, because that sentence is worth more than all the legal articles in the world." "And did you sleep well the night before?" "I slept poorly," Cecilia admitted. "I kept imagining what it would be like to face my father, what it would be like to speak to a real judge, what it would be like if I failed." But my mother noticed I was worried. She lay beside me in bed and said, "Cecilia, no matter what happens tomorrow, I am already proud of you. To see my 7-year-old daughter fighting to defend our family is the most beautiful thing I have ever witnessed in life." Rosanna cried softly, remembering that night of anguish and pride. Then she told me something that changed everything. She said, "Do you know why I am so calm, even knowing I might lose you? Because if I lose you, it won't be due to my omission. It will be because we fought together and fate willed it so. But at least we will know that we did everything possible." Did that calm you? Totally, because I understood that the outcome didn't just depend on me, it depended on justice, on truth, and on the love that drove our entire struggle. And how was the morning of the hearing? I woke up at 5 a.m. even without an alarm clock. I took a shower, put on my best clothes, a little white blouse and a blue skirt that my mother had bought especially for court. "Were you nervous?" I was, but it was a different kind of nervousness. It wasn't fear of failing, it was anxiety to show everything I had learned. "And your mother?" "My mother was more nervous than me," Cecilia smiled. "She reviewed my folder 3 times, checked if I had brought all the documents, asked if I remembered all the laws and the way to the courthouse. On the bus, I mentally reviewed all the arguments, but I also did something Aunt Helena had taught me." "What?" "I prayed. I'm not very religious, but I asked God to give me strength to defend my family with dignity." "And when you arrived at the courthouse, when you saw that big, imposing building full of serious people in suits, your heart pounded. You thought, how will a 7-year-old girl face all this? What gave you courage?" My mother held my hand and said, "Remember, my daughter, you are not here to impress anyone. You are here to tell the truth." And Aunt Helena added, "And the truth always wins in the end." "Is that when you went in?" We walked together to the courtroom door. Before entering, I made sure to organize my folder, take a deep breath, and visualize everything I had studied. "And what was your first thought when you saw the judge?" "I thought he seems like a good person, someone who will listen to what I have to say, and that's when all my preparation made sense." "How so?" "Because I understood that I wasn't there to show that I was intelligent or to impress anyone. I was there to protect my family using the tools I had learned." Cecilia looked at the judge with gratitude. "And when I introduced myself saying, 'I am my mother's lawyer,' it wasn't a child playing adult. It was a daughter defending the one she loved most in the world." The courtroom fell into an emotional silence. "That's how, Your Honor, 3 weeks of intensive study, unconditional love, and iron determination transformed an ordinary girl into the youngest lawyer this court has ever seen." "And now, Cecilia," the judge asked, "how do you feel after telling this entire story?" "I feel at peace, Your Honor, because regardless of your decision, I know that I fought honorably for my family and discovered that when a child is moved by true love, she can move mountains." Cecilia closed her unicorn folder for the last time. That was what I wanted to tell about how I became my mother's lawyer, not out of ambition, not out of revenge, but out of pure and true love. The judge remained silent for long seconds, processing that extraordinary story of courage, determination, and family love. It was time to return to the present. It was time for the decision that would forever change the lives of that brave family. Judge Roberto Mendez remained in absolute silence for almost 2 minutes after Cecilia finished her narrative. 2 minutes that felt like 2 hours to everyone in the courtroom. He took off his glasses, cleaned them carefully, looked at that extraordinary 7-year-old girl, and then at the documents spread on his desk. "Cecilia," he finally said with a voice that carried 3 decades of experience, In 30 years of my career, I have witnessed thousands of cases. I've seen brilliant lawyers moving witnesses' irrefutable evidence, but never ever have I seen anything like what I witnessed today. The courtroom was in a deathly silence. Every person present knew they were experiencing a unique moment in the history of Brazilian justice. "You are not just an intelligent girl who memorized some laws," the judge continued, looking directly into Cecilia's brown eyes. "You are a living example that true justice is born from love, courage, and the determination to protect those we love." Ricardo buried his face in his hands, knowing that his defeat was total and irreversible. Dr. Marcelo nervously arranged his papers, not knowing how to react to the public humiliation he had suffered. Based on all the evidence presented, the judge solemnly stood up, and considering the clear and unequivocal manifestation of the minor Cecilia regarding her own wishes, this court decides that... The silence was deafening. Rosana held Helena's hands, both crying from anxiety. Dona Carmen prayed softly. Cecilia maintained an upright posture, prepared for any outcome. The custody of the minor Cecilia Silva remains exclusively with her mother Rosana Silva, and the request of the petitioner Ricardo Ferreira is denied. The courtroom erupted in applause. People who didn't even know the family clapped, moved. Justice officials, normally serious and impartial, smiled openly. Rosana burst into tears of relief and happiness. "Furthermore," the judge continued when silence returned, "I determine that any future requests for visitation or contact by the petitioner be denied as requested by the minor herself." Ricardo tried to stand up. "Your Honor, this is..." "Mr. Ricardo," the judge interrupted him with authority. "You had 7 years to be a father to this exceptional child. You chose abandonment. Now you want to return only for financial interest. This court does not condone this type of opportunism." "But I have rights." "Rights are earned by duties fulfilled," Cecilia said, standing up from her chair. "You never fulfilled your duties as a father, therefore you lost all your rights." The judge struck the gavel. "This hearing is adjourned," but the story was just beginning. 3 months later, Rosana's cell phone rang at 7 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday. On the other end of the line, an excited voice. "Dona Rosana, this is from TV Globo. Cecilia's story has gone viral nationally. We'd like to do an interview for Fantastico." It was true. The recording of the hearing, authorized by the judge for educational purposes, had spread across the internet like wildfire. Cecilia the lawyer was a trending topic on Twitter. Law pages shared her legal arguments. Mothers cried watching her emotional defense of her family. "Mom, look at this," Cecilia shouted from the living room, pointing at the television. On the screen, her speech about love versus money was playing on the morning news. "I don't want to be famous," Cecilia said with the same maturity as always. "I want other children to see that they can fight for their rights." 5 years later, Cecilia, at 12 years old, Cecilia Silva, to address the National Congress, announced the Speaker of the House. She ascended the main pulpit, now 12 taller, more mature, but with the same determined eyes she had at 7. "Honorable congressmen and women," her voice echoed through the packed plenary. 5 years ago, a 7-year-old girl stood up in a courtroom and said, "I am my mother's lawyer." Today, that same girl returns to show what her fight has achieved. The audience listened in respectful silence. I propose today the Child Legal Education Law, which mandates that all schools in Brazil have an obligatory subject called Children's Rights, where boys and girls learn their basic rights, how to protect themselves, and how to report abuse. "Can children understand laws?" a congresswoman asked. "Yes, they can. I learned law at 7, not because I am special, but because when a child needs to defend herself, she learns anything." Cecilia looked at the audience with intensity. Imagine a Brazil where no child is a victim of abuse because they all know they can report it, where no child is manipulated in separations because they all know their rights, where no child needs to become their own mother's lawyer because all families know how to defend themselves. The ovation lasted 5 minutes. The law was approved unanimously. 9 years later, Cecilia, at 21 at USP's law school, had never seen such a well-attended graduation. Journalists, politicians, jurists, families who had been helped by Cecilia's law. Everyone wanted to see the girl who changed the Brazilian judicial system officially graduate. Cecilia Silva, announced the dean, graduated with honors best student in the class. When she stepped onto the stage to receive her diploma, the audience erupted in applause that lasted 10 minutes. Rosanna wept with pride in the front row beside Helena. "Fellow graduates," Cecilia said into the microphone, "today we officially become lawyers, but being a lawyer is not just about knowing laws, it's about using those laws to protect those in need. That's why I announce today the creation of the Cecilia Silva Institute for the Defense of Children's Rights, a firm that will offer free legal defense to all children in vulnerable situations." The ovation was deafening. 7 years later, Cecilia at 28. The Time Magazine Person of the Year award arrived on a rainy Tuesday. Cecilia was in her office when she received the call. "Miss Silva, congratulations. You have been chosen as Time's Person of the Year." At 28, she had become the youngest Brazilian to receive the award. On the magazine cover, "The Girl Who Changed Justice: How Cecilia Silva Revolutionized Children's Rights Worldwide." The Cecilia Silva Institute now operated in 12 countries, having protected over 50,000 children. "Mom, look at this." Cecilia showed the magazine to Rosanna, who was now coordinating the Institute's social programs. "My daughter is on the cover of Time," Rosanna said, crying with pride. "Who would have thought that little girl would change the world?" "I didn't change the world, Mom. I just used what you taught me, that love is worth more than money." That night at the awards dinner in New York, Cecilia gave a speech that moved the entire world. 21 years ago, she said into the microphone, a 7-year-old girl stood up in a courtroom and said, "I am my mother's lawyer." Today, that phrase has become a symbol that children have a voice, have rights, and have the power to transform the world. The international audience was silent. But I want to be clear, I am not special. I am just a child who had to grow up fast to protect those I loved. And I discovered that when we are moved by true love, we are capable of extraordinary things. Applause echoed through the auditorium in Manhattan. Today, over 100 countries have adopted versions of Cecilia's Law. Millions of children have access to justice. Families are protected from greed, all because a 7-year-old girl refused to be silenced. Cecilia looked at the cameras broadcasting live to the entire world. Therefore, I leave a message for all the children who may be watching. You have a voice, you have rights. And when something is wrong in your life, do not accept silence. Fight, seek help, protect those you love, because sometimes, she concluded with a smile that recalled the courageous 7-year-old girl, the smallest voices are the ones that echo the loudest in history. The standing ovation lasted 15 minutes, but for Cecilia, the most important prize remained the same as 21 years ago, having protected her family and discovered that love always triumphs over money. Her story had begun with a 7-year-old girl saying, "I am my mother's lawyer," and would continue forever as proof that when a child is moved by true love, she can truly change the world. End of story. Music.